Hello, this is Dr. Harriet Fraad with Capitalism Hits Home, a show about the mutual shaping and interconnections of the world and its impact of our politics, our economics, and our personal lives. This show is produced by Democracy at Work, and I want to remind you that that is a vital, nonprofit dedicated to bringing the news you want, news and analysis you won't get elsewhere. It's a small donor-funded organization that welcomes your donations as well as your enthusiasm. Please stay connected. Go with us. Go to www.democracyatwork.info and sign up on our email where you can stay connected with us, hear about new programs, see merchandise and new merchandise, get new releases, and be a part of our organization. We want to thank you because you are our growing audience that keeps on growing. We appreciate your contributions of money and time, your sharing this program with others, and getting the word out. Thank you very much. Today, I want to talk about the interconnection of America's failing geopolitical and economic stance with what's happening in people's personal lives in the United States, because we're in a particularly difficult time, both internationally and also personally in the United States. And I also want to talk about our hope for the future. That will maybe be in the next podcast about what we can do to improve our geopolitical standing, our national standing, and our personal lives. Our position as the dominant world empire is deteriorating on so many different fronts. The United States, as I've said before, but I think it does bear repetition, that after World War II, the United States emerged as the only industrialized nation that wasn't destroyed. And Russia wasn't as industrialized, but it was completely destroyed, and they lost 30 million people in the war, whereas America lost 600,000. And our productive apparatus was intact. Theirs was destroyed, as was all of Europe's and Eastern Europe's. And China, which only had its revolution in 1949, before their revolution, they were one of the poorest countries in the world, and they weren't an industrial power at all. So that we were the king of the world, and our dollar, our currency, was powerful. You know, I remember when I was really young and went to Europe in the 1970s, my God, my husband and I could go to the most fancy hotels and they were cheap because the American dollar was worth so much. We could go out to super restaurants, which we couldn't afford now, because the American dollar was so strong even then. But now it isn't. Now, the most of the world's population are in a different economic alliance from ours. They're not in NATO and they're not in the American alliances. They're in Brics. It's called Brics because it's an economic alliance of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And there are 12 countries that want to join Brics, which will take them out of the dollar as the dominant currency. And you have to remember that one of the things that keeps the dollar high is that people trade in the dollar and keep wanting and needing dollars. If they don't, the value of the dollar goes down. And it certainly has gone down. Anyone who used to go to Europe or Asia before and now does can see that. More and more nations are shifting away from the dollar to the Chinese renminbi or the Chinese yuan, as they are the rising power, or to their own national currencies. If you're in an American alliance, you're expected to trade in dollars. But if you're in the Brics alliance, you can trade in your own national currency as well as in Chinese currency. It's quite interesting that even in our own backyard, which we used to control utterly, in South America, more and more countries are joining BRICS. And they're not adhering to America's favorite, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which loans them money and then expects them to impose austerity on their own people to pay us back. BRICS doesn't expect that at all, which is a big relief to a lot of countries. The Chinese help other countries by building infrastructure. It's their Belts and Roads initiative, for which they don't expect to be paid back. That's a big difference. Recently, I don't know if you've noticed, but Brazil's newly elected leftist leader, Lula da Silva, visited China, and when he got off the plane, he was greeted by a song that had been very, very popular a few years ago, a song about the terror and horror of American imperialism in South America. It was sung in Portuguese. Argentina and Nicaragua are also applying to BRICS. If Argentina, Brazil join BRICS, the biggest landmass in South America will be joining the BRICS alliance and leaving the United States dollar alliance. And then Nicaragua would join also, and that would be the most, not only the most people in the world, but the most people in South America would be in BRICS and not in the American dollar alliance with its economic dominance. The applicants to BRICS are very strange bedfellows indeed, and very diverse, but it's an economic alliance. It's not a political or ideological alliance, and they're Argentina, Nicaragua, Algeria, Indonesia, Turkey, Egypt, Iran, Kazakhstan, Nigeria, Senegal, and Saudi Arabia. It's quite interesting because Saudi Arabia is a predatory capitalist type monarchy, whereas Nicaragua is trying to be a socialism. I'm not saying it succeeds, but it's trying. And Iran is a theocracy. However, they want to join a different kind of economic analysis. I mean, an economic alliance that has a different economic analysis of the world. And so they're all unloading their reserves of American dollars, which weakens America further. We do still have the biggest stockpile of weapons in the world, by far. However, we have lost every war that we fought in since World War II, although in Korea, we fought the idea of unifying Korea as a capitalist country, but Korea was divided into North and South Korea. However, we clean out lost in Vietnam, in Iraq, and in Afghanistan, in spite of the fact that we have the biggest stockpiles in the world and we spend the most on armaments. Even now, we're losing the proxy war, where we're fighting to the last Ukrainian in Ukraine and giving them over 100 million of our taxpayer dollars, while the Republicans threaten that we don't have enough money for things like Social Security and Medicare. We're also the biggest debtor nation in the world, and I'm sure it doesn't help other countries that our Congress and our Republicans are threatened to let us go belly up on our debt. Why should anyone want to buy Treasury notes, which are a bond for the United States, if we might default on our credit? And we're already not only the biggest debtor nation in the world, but won't reverse any of the tax cuts we've gotten. It's most apparent with the estate tax, which is something I just recently realized, that in 1975, the estate tax was $600,000 for either an individual or a couple to be able to leave their children without tax. Now, that doesn't give everybody an equal start by a long shot, but it was $600,000. Now, you can leave one individual, a mother or a father or one person, can leave $12.5 million without any estate tax, and as a couple can leave $25 million without any estate taxes paid to the state. And of course, that doesn't count the cheating rich people have always done, which is they give gold to their children or other people because it can less easily be traced. They give valuable paintings. They start trusts. So, of course, those figures are exaggerated. But that's quite amazing, from $600,000 to $25 million. Because our wealth in America has been allocated upwards towards the top and away from the middle and the bottom. We have now the greatest inequality in the whole developed world. In 1970, we were the most egalitarian nation in the developed world. Now we are the least egalitarian, the biggest gap between wealth and poverty. China looks good to a lot of people in spite of its authoritarian policies. It lifted 880 million people out of poverty. In the United States, more people enter poverty every year. So what is happening? Why is this happening? And what is happening to us? Well, I think that after the McCarthy era in the 1950s, when everything left was suspect, they considered the Communist Party a basically revolutionary and counter-American party that challenged the system, even though it did not say anything in their policies. And in fact, the slogan at the time was, communism is the new Americanism. But communism, socialism, and leftism were very popular in the United States at that time. 1 out of every 4 families had a member that was in the Communist Party, which was perfectly acceptable at the time. And the McCarthy era branded everyone who was in the party as a traitor and someone trying to overthrow the United States, and branded socialists as fellow travelers to that traitorness, or whatever the adjective is, and leftists as also fellow travelers. And so they were cleaned out of the unions, and the unions lost that spark that used to be the most excited about worker power. There were 35% of America was unionized in the 50s. Now it's between 11 and 12%, even though it's increasing as people are realizing how badly they've been exploited. In Scandinavia, there are very strong socialist parties of all kinds, socialist, communist, anarchist parties that put some kind of curb on capitalist greed. We don't have that. We're also the only country of all of the Western European allies and Scandinavia that allows private money in elections. I know more about the intricacies of France than other European countries, but I know this is the case in all that I cited. You're not allowed to have any private money. They cheat, but when they're caught, they're put in jail. And you're not allowed to have TV ads. You're not allowed to have any paid radio ads. Everyone gets the same amount of radio and TV time. and the same amount of money to put up posters, at which they're allowed to do, and then they're all on television at a given forum, given the same amount of money to present their arguments to the population. So you don't have the kind of best democracy money can buy that we have in the United States. The last presidential election in the United States, according to the census figures that are available, all my figures and stuff are available on Google, cost $14.4 billion. Well, who pays the piper calls the tune. How are we going to pay that back? Who's going to pay it back? Well, we know that corporations will still be in charge. We know that with all the talk of deficits and dangers, nobody's brought up, well, why not rescind that $1.7 trillion tax cut that Trump gave to his wealthy buddies? Why do you stop Social Security tax at the sum of $144,000? So if you make over $144,000 a year, you don't have to pay the tax. So the people at the bottom pay more into Social Security than the people at the top. That 10% that owns more than half the wealth in the United States. Well, what's going on here? And why is it going on? And I think it's going on because the profit motive, which inspires capitalism, doesn't pay to hire anybody unless you make more money than you pay them, so that you can get more for you and give less to them, especially unchecked, brings out greed and indifference to other human beings' suffering, a total lack of compassion. A good example is mass shootings. We have more mass shootings than anyone else, at least 7 times more than any other country. In the U.S. so far in 2023, we've had 163 mass shootings. We've had more mass shootings than we have days this month. And a mass shooting is defined as an incident in which 4 or more victims are shot or killed. And that's what each one of these entails, each of the 163, just since the beginning of January. And we should say that mass shootings don't really account for the number of gun deaths in the United States or the number of gun violence incidents. The biggest cause of death of children in America is shootings. And their impact on communities is really evident. And yet, we don't have the kind of gun restrictions that every other developed country has. Why? Why don't we pass the strict gun regulations that every other nation that's developed has? Well, that's because we have the NRA, the National Rifle Association, as a successful lobby to make more money for the gun manufacturers. They're a lobbyist group. And the point of a lobbyist group is to get more money for whoever pays them. And there are 5 lobbyists to every member of our Congress and Senate. Well, what does that mean? Well, the gun manufacturers aren't going to say, buy a gun, make us rich. They'll say, buy a gun, be a man, be able to protect your family, even though the evidence suggests that people with guns are more at risk for shooting each other than they are from the outside. And it's more dangerous if you have guns in your house rather than less. That is corruption. That is corruption that you allow so many people to die with arbitrary mass shootings. 157 of them this year. No, I'm sorry. It's more. Yes, it is. It's 157. Some people calculate up to 163, but the lower number is 157 that fits the definition I gave. The corruption goes everywhere. In the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas turns out to have disobeyed every rule of disclosure and claimed he didn't know. Ignorance is not an excuse in the face of the law. Surely the Supreme Court judge knows that. He was caught accepting a $550 million, $550,000, not $1 million, about a little over $500,000 vacation out of the generosity of Harlan Crow, a right-wing billionaire that particularly gave financing to strike down abortion laws. Does look like a conflict of interest. That same Harlan Crow bought 3 houses, 3 small houses that belonged to Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas's mother lives in one, and Harlan Crow bought that at a high price and is letting Clarence Thomas's mother live there for free, rent-free, and then tells us that he will make one of those houses a museum to honor Clarence Thomas when he dies. Well, that's corruption. When people in charge of the law of the land are stealing, they're not declaring vast sums and gifts they're getting. They're not declaring income. Clarence Thomas and Ginny Thomas did declare between $150,000 and $500,000, but to a corporation that no longer exists. What's that about? Wonder why he got away with that. This is very strange. Ginny Thomas got away with financing 6 buses to go to January 6th. That does look like a conflict of interest, because Clarence Thomas was the only Supreme Court judge that voted that the January 6th insurrection should not be pursued. The people shouldn't be sued. They shouldn't be held accountable. That's interesting. And so that's the Supreme Court of Law in the United States. We have Santos sitting in our Congress, even though he's guilty of having stolen in Brazil, lied about everything to his constituents, lied that he went to Brew College, lied that he was on the volleyball team, lied that he was an excellent student. He lied about the jobs that he had. He lied about the income he had. He lied about the properties he owns. He doesn't own the properties. And he contributed $750,000 to his own campaign when on record he was making $55,000 a year. Whew, wonder where that came from. These are our lawmakers, and that has a profound effect on people's sense that they're safe and that their laws are fair and just. The quest for more money, the quest for profit in capitalism, makes rich men who steal and lie seem like great citizens. Trump, who was elected president, declared that he hadn't paid taxes for 6 years because he's smart. In other words, cheat the government you're supposed to serve. And you're smart. You're not a crook. You're smart. He also bragged about grabbing women by their genitals. And that was okay. That's not legal. But he was in charge of the law of the land. So Americans are not feeling particularly safe in the law. In addition, if you look at the profit motive, you can look at the 2 huge accidents that have polluted our country lately. One is the latest one on the 14th of April was the in Richmond, Indiana, a plastics factory burned. And that factory released into the air and their water in Richmond, Indiana, hydrogen cyanide, benzene, chlorine, carbon monoxide, and white asbestos, as well as tiny plastic bits to go into people's lungs. Cornerstone Trading Company, which owned that plastics recycling factory, had so many violations that the EPA and the town imposed on them. They never fixed it up, and nobody insisted that they did. But they made more money because they didn't spend any money on cleanup. They have sacrificed the lives of people in Richmond for generations to come. But they got away with it, and they were making money, which is why they did it. Because if money is all that you care about, then why worry about the human life you destroy? The same thing happened with the other very recent accident at the Norfolk Southern Railway when a train derailed on February 23rd. The engineer on that train called in the problem. He said that his computer showed that there were hot bearings on 3 of the wheels, which is a danger. He called it in, and Norfolk Southern told him, keep right on going. Keep right on going, because it would save, they didn't explain this, of course, but the logic is, it would save Norfolk Southern Corporation money, because they'd have to stop the train, replace the wheels, the cargo wouldn't be there as quickly, and they could lose money. Well, Norfolk Southern made $4.8 billion just in recent years. Balancing between life and money, they chose making more money, because if your whole object is profit, why do you have to worry about human life? The same thing happened with other accidents. This is an indication of a set of values which is terrifying. Now, this is the end of this segment, but I will continue in the next segment. And I want to remind you that this is a podcast from Democracy at Work, a small donor, nonprofit organization that is dedicated to bringing this kind of message to you. And I hope you get this message. In this case, that our personal lives are really affected by the level of capitalist corruption that is around us. Thank you very much. Goodbye.